It was a quiet evening in a small town surrounded by old trees and narrow roads. The sun had already gone down, leaving the sky painted with shades of deep purple and gray. The air felt heavy, and a light mist floated over the ground. In that stillness, David sat alone by his living room window, staring out at the dark road that led to the nearby lake. His heart felt restless for reasons he could not explain. Something inside him told him that night was not going to be ordinary. He sighed, rubbed his tired eyes, and tried to calm himself, but a strange uneasiness kept growing in his chest. He had always trusted his instincts. For 60 years, he had lived in that town, and whenever he felt something unusual, it always turned out to be true. That night, as he looked out the window, he noticed a shadow moving slowly past his front gate. It was his daughter-in-law, Clara. She was wearing a dark coat, and her long hair was tied up tightly. David frowned. It was almost midnight. Why would she be going out at this hour? He leaned closer to the window and saw something that made him pause. Clara was dragging a large, dark suitcase behind her. The wheels of the bag made a dull rolling sound on the gravel road. David's breath caught for a moment. He had seen her carry that suitcase before. It was one his late wife had gifted them years ago. But why would Clara be taking it out so late at night? And why was she alone? He stood up, confused and curious, and walked toward the door quietly. He didn't want her to see him. His mind started to race. Maybe she was going to the bus stop. Maybe she had a fight with his son, Mark. But Mark was working out of town this week, and Clara was supposed to be home alone. None of it made sense. As she walked down the path toward the lake road, David hesitated for a second. Then, driven by the strange feeling that something was wrong, he decided to follow her. He grabbed his coat and flashlight, making sure to step quietly on the wooden porch. The night air hit his face, cold and damp, carrying the smell of wet earth. The streetlights flickered weakly, and the sound of crickets filled the silence. I still remember that night, David thought to himself. It was the night everything changed. The night that opened a door he could never close again. He kept a good distance behind Clara, careful not to make any noise. She walked quickly, her steps nervous, glancing around as if making sure no one was watching. David's heart started beating faster. The path to the lake was lonely, surrounded by tall trees that bent inward, almost like they were whispering secrets to each other. The lake itself was about a mile away, hidden behind thick bushes and reeds. After a few minutes of walking, David saw her stop at the edge of the lake. The water shimmered faintly under the moonlight. Clara looked around once more, then started dragging the suitcase closer to the water. David crouched behind a tree, his breath shallow. He could see her struggling to lift the suitcase, pushing it slowly toward the lake. Then she stopped, opened the suitcase halfway, looked inside for a moment, and quickly zipped it back up. A strange fear gripped David. What could she possibly be doing? Without hesitation, Clara pushed the suitcase into the water. It splashed loudly, breaking the stillness of the night. She stood there, watching as it slowly began to sink beneath the dark surface. For a few seconds, she didn't move. Then, suddenly, she covered her mouth with her hands, as if she wanted to cry but couldn't let the sound escape. David's whole body froze. His mind filled with questions he couldn't answer. What was inside that suitcase? Why did she look so scared? He wanted to run to her, to ask her what she was doing, but something stopped him. There was something almost haunting about the way she stood there, staring at the water. Then, just as quietly as she had come, she turned around and began walking back toward the house. Her steps were slower this time, heavy and trembling. David stayed hidden until she disappeared down the path. Only then did he step closer to the edge of the lake. The water was calm again, only small ripples spreading outward from where the suitcase had gone under. The moonlight reflected off the surface like silver glass. He stood there for a while, trying to make sense of what he had seen. Part of him wanted to forget it, to go back home and pretend he had seen nothing. But another part, stronger and more curious, wanted to know the truth. His heart pounded as he stared at the spot where the suitcase had vanished. He told himself maybe it was nothing dangerous. Maybe it was just old clothes, or trash, or something she didn't want anymore. But deep down, he didn't believe that. The fear in her eyes had been too real. When he finally returned home, the house felt different. Cold. Silent. He looked toward Clara's room, where her light was still on. He heard her footsteps pacing, then the faint sound of crying. He sat in his chair, trying to calm himself, but the image of the sinking suitcase played over and over in his mind. The next morning, Clara acted like nothing had happened. She made breakfast, greeted him politely, and even smiled. But David noticed her hands trembling slightly as she poured the tea. Her eyes were swollen, like she hadn't slept at all. He wanted to ask her what she had been doing, but something stopped him again. Maybe fear. Maybe pity. She looked fragile, lost in her own thoughts. So, he stayed silent and watched. Hours passed, and the day went on quietly, but David's mind refused to rest. That night, when Clara went to bed, he couldn't hold back his curiosity any longer. He decided he would go back to the lake. He needed to see what was inside that suitcase. He told himself it was not because he wanted to spy on her, but because something deep inside him whispered that the truth might be worse than his imagination. He waited until midnight again. The house was silent. Clara's room was dark now, and the wind outside had grown stronger, shaking the windows. He grabbed his flashlight and put on his boots. As he opened the front door, the cold wind hit him again, carrying the smell of the lake. The road felt longer that night. Every sound made him stop and look around, the crunch of gravel under his feet, the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl. His heart pounded in his ears. When he finally reached the lake, the mist had grown thick, almost hiding the water completely. The moonlight was faint, making everything look ghostly and strange. He stood by the same spot where Clara had stood the night before. He looked around, searching the water for any sign of the suitcase. The surface looked calm, but he knew it was down there somewhere, lying deep in the cold mud. He picked up a long stick from the ground and tried to stir the shallow part of the lake. Nothing. He moved further in, the water soaking his shoes and pants. Then, suddenly, his stick hit something hard beneath the surface. His chest tightened. He tried again. Yes, there it was. Something heavy and solid. He took a deep breath and began pulling at it, using all his strength. It took several tries before he finally managed to drag the edge of the suitcase up onto the muddy bank. It was dripping wet, covered in weeds and dirt. His hands shook as he wiped it clean. The lock was still closed, but one corner had broken, letting water seep inside. David hesitated. His heart raced faster than ever before. What if it was something terrible? What if it was something he could never unsee? But it was too late to turn back now. With trembling fingers, he forced the broken corner open a little more. A foul smell escaped, mixing with the cold air. His stomach turned. He pushed the flashlight closer, trying to see through the narrow gap. Inside, something pale caught his eye, something that looked like fabric, or maybe skin. He stepped back, feeling dizzy. His breath came fast, his heart hammering in his chest. For a moment, he thought he saw a hand. Just for a second. But he couldn't be sure. His mind refused to believe it. He shut the suitcase quickly, unable to look any longer. His whole body trembled. He felt sick, terrified, and confused. What had Clara done? What had she hidden? The lake was silent around him, but in his mind, a storm had started. He looked back toward the path leading home, and for the first time, he felt afraid to go back. The truth was too close now. Too real. He knew he couldn't tell anyone yet, not until he was sure. Not until he knew exactly what was inside. But deep down, a cold fear told him that his life would never be the same again after that night. As he stared at the lake, he heard something, a rustling sound behind him. He turned quickly, but there was no one there. Just the wind moving through the trees. Yet, for a brief second, he thought he saw a shadow near the bushes, watching him. His throat went dry. He grabbed his flashlight and pointed it toward the noise. The light flickered for a moment, then went out completely. The darkness swallowed him. And in that darkness, he heard footsteps. Slow. Coming closer. David froze where he stood, unable to breathe. David stood completely still, his body trembling as the sound of footsteps came closer through the mist. The night air had turned colder, and the silence around the lake felt heavy, almost alive. He held the broken flashlight tightly in his hand, trying to see through the darkness. The faint sound of water moving against the shore mixed with the crunch of footsteps on wet ground. His heart pounded in his chest like a drum. For a few seconds, everything went quiet again. He could hear his own breathing, uneven and fast. Then, out of nowhere, a branch snapped nearby. David spun around, but he couldn't see anything. The moon was hiding behind clouds now, and the mist had grown thicker. It felt like the whole world had turned into shadows. He wanted to run, but his legs refused to move. A voice in his head told him to leave the suitcase, to go home before something terrible happened. But another part of him, the part filled with fear and curiosity, told him he couldn't walk away now. He had already seen too much. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw movement, a dark figure standing near the trees. It was tall and still, almost blending into the night. For a moment, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. But then, the figure moved. Slowly. Carefully. David stepped back, his boots sinking slightly into the mud. The figure didn't speak. It just stood there, watching. The silence between them stretched until it became unbearable. Finally, David managed to whisper, his voice shaking. "Who's there?" No answer. Just the sound of the wind. Then, suddenly, the figure turned and disappeared into the woods. The sound of running footsteps faded quickly, swallowed by the darkness. David stood frozen, too afraid to follow. He waited for a long time, listening to every sound, every whisper of the wind through the trees. When he was finally sure that he was alone, he looked down at the suitcase again. It was still half open, lying in the mud. The sight of it made his stomach twist. He couldn't open it again, not now. Not when he didn't even know who or what else was out there watching him. So, with shaking hands, he pushed it back into the water. It sank slowly, leaving behind a few small bubbles that rose and vanished on the surface. He turned and hurried home, his breath fogging the cold air. The path felt longer than before, every shadow on the road making him flinch. By the time he reached his front door, his hands were numb and his heart still racing. When he entered the house, everything was quiet. He looked at the clock, it was almost 3 a.m. He hung his coat, removed his muddy boots, and listened. From Clara's room, he heard faint movement. She was awake. He walked quietly to her door. The light inside was on. Through the thin crack under the door, he could see the shadow of her feet moving back and forth. It looked like she was pacing. He wanted to knock, to ask her where she had been that night before, to ask her what was in the suitcase, but fear stopped him again. He went back to his room and sat down, staring at the floor. His mind was full of questions. Who was that person near the lake? Why was Clara so nervous? What was in that suitcase? He rubbed his face with his hands and whispered to himself, something is not right. When morning came, the sun rose weakly through the gray clouds. David didn't sleep at all. He waited until he heard Clara making breakfast before stepping out of his room. She looked pale but tried to smile as she greeted him. "Good morning, Dad," she said softly, avoiding his eyes. David nodded, pretending to smile. "Morning, Clara. As they sat at the table, he noticed her hands again. They were shaking slightly as she poured tea into his cup. He couldn't take his eyes off her. She looked exhausted, like she had been crying again. "Did you sleep well?" he asked quietly. She froze for a second, then forced a small smile. "Yes, just a little tired." He didn't reply. He just watched her. The silence between them felt uncomfortable. After a while, she stood up and began cleaning the dishes, even though breakfast wasn't finished yet. It was as if she wanted to keep herself busy, to avoid any conversation. Later that afternoon, Clara said she had to go into town for some shopping. David offered to drive her, but she refused quickly. "No, it's fine," she said too fast. "I'll take the bus." He nodded slowly, but as soon as she left the house, his mind started spinning again. He decided he needed answers. He couldn't live with the fear and confusion anymore. So, after making sure she was gone, he went into her room. It felt wrong, but he had to know. The room was neat and clean. On her dressing table, he saw her perfume, some makeup, and a photo frame of her and Mark smiling at their wedding. He picked it up and looked at it closely. They looked so happy, so full of love. But now, that same woman had gone to the lake at midnight to hide something that might destroy their lives. He searched quietly, checking the wardrobe, the drawers, under the bed, nothing strange. Then, when he opened her closet, he noticed something missing. The old red coat she always wore during winter was gone. It was the same one she wore the night he followed her. The sight of that empty hanger made his chest tighten. He sat down on the bed, feeling helpless. There was something dark in her life, something she was hiding, something that terrified her. And he didn't know how to help. When Clara returned home that evening, David acted normal. But as she walked past him, he noticed dirt on her shoes. Mud. The same kind of dark mud that covered the lake's edge. She quickly changed her shoes and went straight to her room. That night, David couldn't rest. Every sound in the house made him jump. Around midnight, he heard her door open again. He sat up quietly and peeked through his window. Clara was walking toward the road again, holding something small in her hands, a black plastic bag. David grabbed his coat and followed her once more. She walked the same path, but this time, she stopped near the woods before reaching the lake. She looked around carefully, then crouched down near a large tree and buried the small bag under the soil. David's heart pounded harder. What was she hiding this time? As soon as she left, he waited a few minutes before walking toward the spot. The ground was still soft, freshly dug. He knelt and started removing the dirt with his hands. His fingers were cold, and the earth smelled damp and strong. After a few minutes, he found the bag. It was small and tied tightly. He hesitated for a moment, then untied it slowly. Inside, there was a phone. He turned it on, but the screen was cracked and the battery dead. He placed it in his pocket and covered the hole again. He returned home before Clara did, his hands still dirty. He sat down in the dark living room, staring at the broken phone. Who did it belong to? And why was she hiding it? When Clara came back, she didn't see him. She went straight to her room, locked the door, and didn't come out for the rest of the night. The next day, David went into town to visit an old friend who worked at a repair shop. He asked him to fix the phone but not tell anyone. The man agreed, saying it would take a few hours. David waited nearby, his stomach tight and his mind full of fear. When he finally got the phone back, the man looked uneasy. "There were some pictures," he said quietly. "You might want to see them yourself." David nodded, thanked him, and left quickly. Sitting alone on a bench, he opened the phone. There were only a few photos, but what he saw made his hands tremble. One picture showed Clara standing near the lake, at night, just like when he followed her. In another photo, there was someone else beside her. A man. His face was half hidden, but David could see a dark bruise near his neck. The last photo made David's blood run cold. It was the same suitcase. Open. And inside it was something wrapped in a white sheet, stained with red. David's heart felt like it stopped. He stared at the image, unable to breathe. His body felt weak, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped the phone. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. He closed the phone quickly and looked around. The world suddenly felt different, darker, quieter. He didn't know what to do. Should he go to the police? Should he tell Mark? Should he confront Clara? His mind was a storm of confusion and fear. When he reached home, Clara was in the kitchen. She smiled faintly when she saw him. "You went out early," she said. David nodded, forcing a small smile. "Yes, I had something to take care of." She looked tired again, but her eyes were sharper now, watchful. "You look pale," she said. "Everything okay?" He swallowed hard. "Yes. Just tired." The rest of the day passed slowly. David couldn't stop thinking about the photos. He didn't know who the man in the picture was. He didn't know if he was alive or dead. But one thing was certain, Clara was hiding something terrible. That night, as he sat alone in the dark, he heard a soft sound behind him. The floor creaked. He turned slowly, and there she was, standing in the doorway, her face half hidden in shadow. "Were you at the lake again last night?" she asked quietly, her voice calm but cold. David's blood ran cold. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Clara took a step closer, her eyes dark and unreadable. "I know you saw me, David," she whispered. "And I know you found something that doesn't belong to you." He couldn't move. He couldn't even breathe. She smiled faintly, a sad, tired smile. "You shouldn't have gone there," she said. "Now you'll have to know everything." David felt his whole body go numb. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. The truth he had been chasing was standing right in front of him, and it was about to destroy everything. For a long moment, the room was silent. David stood frozen near the chair, his heart pounding so loudly it was the only sound he could hear. Clara stood at the doorway, her face pale and her eyes dark, like she had been crying for days. The weak light from the hallway cast shadows across her face, making her look both frightened and dangerous at the same time. He didn't know what to say. His throat felt dry, his lips trembling. He could still hear her voice echoing in his mind, "You shouldn't have gone there." Clara took a slow step forward. Her hands were shaking slightly, and her eyes never left his. For the first time since she had come into their family, she didn't look gentle or calm. She looked like someone carrying a storm inside her. David swallowed hard and forced himself to speak. "Clara. I don't understand. What's happening? What was in that suitcase?" She closed her eyes for a second, like she was gathering courage. Then she whispered, "You saw the photos, didn't you?" David didn't answer. The phone was still hidden in his coat pocket. He didn't know how she knew, but she did. She gave a small, tired laugh. "I knew it," she said softly. "You shouldn't have gone through my things, David. You shouldn't have followed me. But maybe it's better this way. Maybe you deserve to know the truth before it's too late." David stared at her, fear mixing with confusion. "Clara, please, tell me what's going on. What was in that suitcase? Who is that man in the photo?" Clara looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes filled with tears. Then, she sat down at the table, her hands covering her face. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she whispered. "I was trying to protect Mark. I didn't want him to find out." David felt a chill run through him. Protect him? From what? Clara lifted her head slowly. Her face was wet with tears now. That man, the one in the picture. His name was Eric. I knew him before I met Mark. We were friends for years. He wasn't a good man, David. He was dangerous. David's stomach tightened. He didn't move or speak, just listened as her trembling voice filled the room. After I married Mark, she continued, Eric came back into my life. He found me again. He started calling me, sending messages. He said he needed help, that he was in trouble. I tried to ignore him, but he wouldn't stop. He said he'd tell Mark lies about me, that he'd ruin our family if I didn't do what he wanted. She stopped, wiping her tears with shaking hands. David could see she was struggling to breathe. One night, he came to the house, she said finally. Mark was away for work, and I was alone. Eric, he forced his way inside. He was drunk and angry. He said I owed him money, that I ruined his life. He was shouting, breaking things. I was so scared, David. I thought he was going to hurt me. David's heart was beating faster now. He could picture the scene, his daughter-in-law trapped in the house, terrified, with a violent man threatening her. I tried to calm him down, Clara said, her voice trembling, but he wouldn't listen. He pushed me. I fell and hit my head. Everything went blurry. Then I saw the knife. She stopped again. The silence stretched between them. David's breath caught. What did you do? He whispered. Her eyes met his, full of pain. I didn't mean to, David. I swear. It happened so fast. He came toward me, and I panicked. I grabbed the knife and pushed him away. But he kept coming. I pushed again, harder. And then, he fell. Her voice broke completely. She covered her face, sobbing quietly. David felt like the room was spinning. His knees went weak. He gripped the edge of the chair for support. Clara, he whispered. You mean, he's... She nodded slowly, unable to say the word. David sat down heavily, his mind refusing to believe what he was hearing. His daughter-in-law, the woman who had always smiled so kindly, was confessing to killing a man and hiding his body in a suitcase. I didn't know what to do, Clara said after a long pause. I sat there for hours, just staring at him. I couldn't call the police. They would never believe me. It would destroy Mark's life. He'd lose everything. So, I wrapped him up, cleaned the floor, and put him in the suitcase. I waited until midnight, then took it to the lake. David's hands shook violently. His throat felt tight. You should have told me, Clara, he whispered. You should have told someone. She looked at him with red, swollen eyes. I couldn't. You would have told Mark, and he would have gone to the police. I couldn't let him suffer because of me. The weight of her words filled the air, pressing down on both of them. For a while, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Finally, David took a deep breath. And the phone? The one you buried near the woods? Clara hesitated, then said quietly, it was Eric's. He called me that night before coming. I buried it so no one could trace it back to me. David rubbed his face, feeling sick. Everything suddenly made sense, the suitcase, the late-night trips, the fear in her eyes. But still, something didn't feel right. He looked at her closely. Clara, when I went to the lake last night, someone else was there. A man. I saw him watching me. Clara's head snapped up. Her eyes widened in fear. What? Are you sure? Yes, David said. He was standing near the trees, just watching. I thought it might be my imagination, but now I'm not so sure. Clara stood up quickly, her hands trembling again. Oh no, she whispered. No, no, no. David frowned. Clara, what is it? She began pacing the room, her face turning pale. It can't be, she said under her breath. He's gone. I made sure he was gone. David felt a cold chill run down his spine. What do you mean, gone? You said he was dead. She stopped and looked at him with terrified eyes. He was. I'm sure he was. I checked. I watched the suitcase sink myself. David's heart skipped a beat. Then who was at the lake last night? Clara didn't answer. She just stood there, breathing fast, her eyes darting toward the window as if expecting someone to be outside. The fear on her face was real, deep and wild. David walked toward her. Clara, you need to calm down. Maybe it was just someone passing by. She shook her head violently. No, you don't understand. If someone knows what I did, if they saw me that night, they'll come for me. They'll destroy everything. He put a hand on her shoulder, trying to steady her. Listen, we'll figure this out. We'll go to the police tomorrow morning. Tell them everything. Maybe it was self-defense. You were protecting yourself. She looked at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. No, David. You don't get it. If I go to the police now, they won't believe me. It's too late. Before he could say anything else, there was a sudden loud knock on the door. Both of them froze. It was a heavy, urgent knock, 3 times, sharp and quick. The kind that made your heart stop for a second. They stared at each other, neither moving. The knocking came again. David's voice trembled. Who could that be at this hour? Clara shook her head slowly. Don't open it, she whispered. Please. Don't open the door. But the knocking continued, louder now. Whoever it was, they weren't going to leave. David moved toward the door, his hands shaking. Clara grabbed his arm. Don't, she said again, tears in her eyes. Please, David. He looked at her, torn between fear and responsibility. It could be Mark, he said quietly. He might have come home early. But deep down, he knew it wasn't Mark. Something about the way those knocks echoed in the silent house made his blood run cold. Slowly, he reached for the handle. The knocking stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. He opened the door just a crack and peered outside. The porch light flickered weakly in the wind. No one was there. The street was empty. See, he said, turning back toward Clara. There's no one. But before he could finish, a shadow moved past the window. Clara gasped, backing away. David's heart jumped into his throat. He slammed the door shut and locked it quickly. They both stood there, breathing hard, staring at the window. Outside, something, or someone, was moving. They could hear faint footsteps on the gravel, slow and deliberate, circling the house. David turned off the lights. The house sank into darkness. They stood together in silence, listening. The footsteps stopped near the back door. Then came another sound, something metallic scraping against the door handle. Clara covered her mouth to stop from crying out. Her eyes were wide with terror. David whispered, "Go to your room. Lock the door." She nodded quickly and ran upstairs. David grabbed the old metal rod he kept near the fireplace, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold it. The scraping sound stopped. The night was silent again. David moved slowly toward the back door, every step echoing in his chest. He reached it and pressed his ear against the wood. Nothing. Only the sound of the wind. He waited, counting the seconds. Then suddenly, something hit the door hard from the outside. The whole house shook. David jumped back, his heart racing. He looked toward the stairs, but Clara was nowhere to be seen. Then, from upstairs, he heard her scream. The scream tore through the silence like a knife. It was sharp, terrified, and full of pain. David's blood ran cold the moment he heard it. For a few seconds, he couldn't move, his mind froze, his body stiffened. Then his instincts took over. He dropped the metal rod and ran toward the staircase, shouting Clara's name. The house felt darker than ever, every shadow stretching long and heavy against the walls. His heart pounded so hard it hurt. "Clara! Clara, where are you?" he yelled as he climbed the stairs 2 steps at a time. His voice echoed through the narrow hallway, but there was no answer. Only the creak of the old wood beneath his feet and the sound of the wind rattling the windows. When he reached the top, her bedroom door was wide open. The light inside flickered weakly from a single lamp on the table. The curtains were half open, the night air blowing them gently. The bed was empty. The blanket had fallen to the floor, and one of her slippers lay near the door. "Clara," he called again, louder this time. His throat felt dry, his voice cracking. Then he heard it, faint, shaky breathing coming from the corner of the room. He turned his flashlight toward the sound. Clara was crouched on the floor near the window, her back pressed against the wall. Her hands were shaking, and her eyes were wide with fear. "Clara, what happened?" he asked, rushing toward her. She pointed a trembling hand toward the window. "Someone was there," she whispered. "Outside the window. He was watching me." David quickly looked outside, but the yard was empty. Only the old trees moved in the wind. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I saw him, David. He was standing right there, just staring at me. The same eyes, the same face." David's stomach tightened. "The same face? You mean Eric?" She didn't answer. She just kept shaking her head, whispering, "It can't be him. It can't. He's gone. I made sure." David knelt beside her, trying to calm her down. "Listen to me, Clara. You need to breathe. Whoever it is, we'll find out. But we have to stay calm." Her body was trembling so badly that he could feel it through the floor. She looked at him, her face pale as chalk. "You don't understand, David," she said, her voice breaking. "If he's alive, if he somehow got out, he'll come for me. He'll come for both of us." David didn't know what to say. He had seen the suitcase with his own eyes. He had seen how deep it had sunk. It was impossible for anyone to survive that. But the fear in Clara's eyes was too real to ignore. He stood up and walked to the window, checking the latch. It was locked but weak. The cold air slipped through the cracks. He looked out into the darkness again, but there was no one there. Still, the uneasiness in his chest refused to fade. He turned back to her. "Pack a small bag," he said firmly. "We're leaving this house tonight." Clara blinked in confusion. "Where will we go?" "To my friend Martin's place. He lives near the main road. It's safer there. You can rest, and we'll figure out what to do next." She hesitated, glancing nervously at the window again. "But what if he follows us?" David placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll be careful. Trust me." She nodded weakly and began gathering a few things into a small bag, her phone, wallet, a sweater. David went downstairs to grab his car keys and check the doors again. Everything looked normal, but his heart still raced with dread. The back door had fresh scratch marks near the handle, like someone had tried to open it from outside. He ran his fingers over the marks. They were deep. Real. A sound from upstairs made him look up. It was a soft thud, followed by Clara's voice calling, "David?" He rushed back up. "I'm here," he said, entering the room. She was standing by the closet, her bag in hand. "I heard something," she whispered. "From the hallway." They both stood still, listening. The old house groaned with the wind, but then, there it was again. A slow, dragging sound. Like footsteps. Coming from the other end of the hallway. David stepped closer to the door and listened carefully. The sound stopped. He peeked out, but the hallway was empty. Only the dim yellow light from the wall lamp flickered weakly. He motioned for Clara to stay behind him as they moved toward the stairs. Every step felt heavy, the air thick with tension. When they reached the top of the staircase, David's flashlight flickered and went out completely. "Not again," he muttered under his breath. He hit it a few times, but the light refused to return. The house fell into darkness once more. "Stay close to me," he said softly. They moved slowly down the stairs, their footsteps quiet and careful. The only sound was the creaking of wood beneath their feet and the faint rustle of the wind outside. When they reached the living room, David stopped. Something felt wrong. The front door was slightly open. He was sure he had locked it. He froze, staring at it. The door swayed gently with the wind, the hinges creaking. Clara clutched his arm. "David," she whispered. He took a slow step forward, peering through the gap. The porch light flickered again, casting short bursts of yellow across the front yard. For a moment, he saw nothing. Then, a shape moved near the fence, tall, slow, almost gliding through the mist. David's breath caught. Clara saw it too. "That's him," she whispered in terror. "That's Eric." David blinked hard. "No, Clara. It's impossible. It can't be him." But the shape moved again, closer this time. It stopped near the porch, just out of the light. They couldn't see his face, only the outline of his body. Without thinking, David slammed the door shut and locked it again. "We're leaving now," he said quickly. "Through the back." Clara nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. They rushed toward the kitchen, but before David could reach for the back door handle, there was another sound, a deep, heavy bang from the front of the house. Then another. Someone was hitting the door hard. Clara screamed and dropped her bag. The banging grew louder, faster. Whoever it was wanted to get in. "Go!" David shouted, grabbing her hand and pulling her toward the back door. He unlocked it and pushed it open. The cold night air hit them as they ran out into the yard. The ground was wet and slippery from the earlier rain. Behind them, the banging continued. They ran down the small path behind the house, heading toward the road. David's car was parked near the old shed. He fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking. Clara kept looking back at the house, her face pale with fear. "Hurry," she cried. "He's coming." David managed to unlock the car. They both jumped in. His hands trembled as he tried to start the engine. The key turned, but the car only coughed weakly and died. He tried again. Nothing. "Come on," he shouted in frustration, hitting the steering wheel. Then, in the side mirror, he saw it, the same shadow moving toward them, slow but steady. The figure stopped near the shed, half hidden in the darkness. "David," Clara whispered. "He's here." Finally, the engine roared to life. David hit the gas pedal, and the car shot forward. Gravel flew from under the tires as they sped down the narrow road, away from the house. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. The only sound was the rushing wind and the pounding of their hearts. David's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Clara sat beside him, shaking, staring out the window as the dark trees passed by. After what felt like forever, David slowed down and pulled over near a small rest stop. His breathing was heavy, his chest tight. "We'll stop here for a moment," he said softly. "I need to think." Clara nodded weakly, wiping her tears. He followed us, she whispered. He knows where we are. David turned to her, his face serious. Listen, Clara. If that was really Eric, if somehow he's still alive, then we have to tell the police. There's no other way. She shook her head violently. No! You don't understand. If they find out what I did, I'll go to jail. They'll never believe I was defending myself. Then we can tell them together, David said gently. I'll stand by you. Your family. Clara looked at him, her eyes full of pain. You don't have to do this for me, David. He sighed deeply. I do. Mark deserves to know the truth. Whatever this is, we have to face it. They sat in silence for a while. The wind howled softly through the trees. The faint light of dawn began to appear in the distance, painting the sky gray-blue. For a moment, David thought it was over, that maybe whoever had followed them had given up. But then he noticed something strange. On the windshield, just near the corner of the glass, there was a small smear. Like someone had touched it with wet fingers. He leaned closer, squinting. The mark looked like a fingerprint, muddy and fresh. He turned to Clara. Did you touch this? She shook her head slowly. No. His heart began to race again. He stepped out of the car, looking around. The area was empty, quiet. But he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them from the trees. He walked around to the back of the car and stopped. In the soft dirt behind the vehicle, there were footprints. Fresh. Leading from the woods straight toward the car. He froze, staring at them. Each step was deep and clear, like someone had been standing there just minutes ago. Clara, he said quietly, get back in the car. She looked out the window. Why? What's wrong? Just do it, he said firmly. She climbed back inside, and he followed, locking the doors quickly. He started the car again, his hands shaking. They drove off without looking back. The road ahead was long and empty, the morning light slowly breaking through the mist. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Both of them knew one thing for sure, whatever had come back from that lake wasn't going to stop. As they passed the old church on the hill, Clara turned her head toward the window. Her face went white as snow. David, she whispered in a trembling voice. He looked at her, confused. What is it? She pointed toward the mirror. He's behind us. David glanced into the rearview mirror and froze. Far down the road, a dark figure stood motionless in the middle of the lane. Watching them. David's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. The dark figure stood completely still in the middle of the road, half covered by the morning mist. It didn't move, didn't run, just stood there, watching them. The rising sun cast a dull light on the road, but the shadow behind them looked darker than anything around it. Clara's voice trembled as she whispered, "It's him, David." "I know it's him." David didn't answer. His throat felt dry, his heartbeat echoing in his ears. He hit the gas pedal, trying to drive faster, to put distance between them and whatever that thing was. But even as the car moved, he couldn't shake the feeling that the shadow was still following them. He glanced again into the mirror, but the road behind them was now empty. The figure had vanished. Clara clutched her bag tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. "He's playing with us," she said softly, staring out the window. "He always used to do that, disappear, then show up when I least expected it. He enjoyed my fear." Her voice cracked as tears filled her eyes. David looked at her for a moment. "Clara, you have to tell me everything," he said firmly. "No more hiding. I need to know exactly what happened between you and Eric. What led you to that lake?" She turned to him, silent for a while, then sighed deeply. "It started months before that night," she said slowly. "Eric wasn't the man we thought he was. He was charming when I first met him, gentle even. But after the wedding, everything changed. He became controlling, angry, jealous. He would check my phone, follow me when I went out, question every call, every message. He said he loved me, but it wasn't love, it was something dark. David kept his eyes on the road, listening quietly. One night, she continued, I found something in his desk. Letters. Photos. He had been following someone, taking pictures of people he didn't even know. Women, mostly. Some were taken at night, from far away. When I asked him about it, he smiled and said they were memories. That's when I knew something was very wrong. She paused, staring at the floor. He started threatening me after that. Said if I ever left him, he'd make me regret it. He told me that even death couldn't keep him away. I tried to run once, but he found me. That's the night it happened. David's grip tightened on the wheel. The night at the lake? She nodded, her voice trembling. He hit me. Hard. I thought he was going to kill me. I ran out of the house, and he followed. We ended up by the lake, it was raining that night. Everything happened so fast. I pushed him, he fell, and he hit his head on a rock. I thought he was dead. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. So I put him in the suitcase and threw it into the water. Her voice broke completely now, tears running down her cheeks. I thought it was over, David. I thought I could finally breathe again. But now, she looked at him with wide, terrified eyes. Now I think he's back. David didn't speak for a while. The road ahead stretched endlessly, empty and gray. He finally said, Clara, I don't believe in ghosts. But I do believe in people who can do terrible things. Maybe someone else found out. Maybe someone is trying to scare you. Clara shook her head. You didn't see him last night. You didn't see his eyes. It was him. I'd know those eyes anywhere. They drove in silence for the next half hour, both lost in their thoughts. Eventually, they reached the edge of a small town. The streets were quiet, most of the shops still closed. David parked the car near an old diner and turned to her. We need help. We can't keep running like this. Clara hesitated. The police? He nodded. Yes. We'll tell them everything. It's the only way. But before he could step out of the car, Clara grabbed his arm. Wait, she said. Look. Across the street, near a payphone, a man stood under a flickering streetlight. His clothes were soaked, as if he'd come straight from the lake. His face was hidden by his hood, but there was something about the way he stood, tilted slightly forward, still as stone, that made David's heart pound harder. Clara's breathing grew fast. That's him, she whispered. I know it. David stared at the figure, trying to see his face, but the light kept flickering. When a car passed by and its headlights swept across the street, the man was gone. Come on, David said, stepping out. We're going inside. Stay close. They entered the diner. The bell above the door jingled softly. The smell of coffee and fried food filled the air. A few early morning customers sat quietly at their tables. David guided Clara to a booth near the back and told her to sit. He went to the counter and asked the waitress for a phone to call the police. As he waited, he glanced out the window and froze. Across the street, standing at the edge of the woods, was the same figure. Watching. David felt the color drain from his face. He turned quickly to tell Clara, but she was gone. His chest tightened in panic. Clara, he called softly, looking around. The waitress gave him a confused look. She just went outside, she said. Said she needed some air. David's stomach dropped. He rushed out of the diner, scanning the street. "Clara!" he shouted. His voice echoed through the quiet morning. He saw her near the woods, standing completely still. The figure was gone again. He ran to her, grabbing her shoulders. "What are you doing? You can't just walk off like that." She turned to him slowly, her face pale and blank. "He was calling me," she whispered. "I heard his voice. He said my name." David looked around. "There's no one here, Clara. You're imagining it." But she shook her head. "No, David. He said, you can't hide from me. He said he'll never stop." David didn't know what to believe anymore. Was she losing her mind? Or was someone really haunting her? He took her hand and said firmly, "We're going to the police station. Now." They got back into the car and drove toward the center of town. The streets began to fill with morning traffic. For the first time, David felt a small sense of safety. At least there were people around. When they reached the police station, they hurried inside. An officer at the front desk looked up, surprised. "Can I help you?" he asked. David took a deep breath. "We need to report someone. We think we're being followed." The officer frowned slightly. "Followed? By who?" Before David could answer, Clara spoke quietly. "My husband. Eric." The officer blinked. "And where is he now?" Clara's lips trembled. "He's dead." There was a long silence. The officer looked from one to the other, clearly confused. "Ma'am, are you saying a dead man is following you?" David rubbed his forehead. "Look, it's complicated. Please, just check the lake near the old forest road. You'll find a suitcase there. Inside it," he hesitated. "Inside it, you'll find a body." The officer's expression changed immediately. He picked up the phone. "Stay right here," he said, calling someone in the back. Within minutes, 2 detectives came out, and they took David and Clara into a small room for questioning. David told them everything, how he had seen Clara throw the suitcase, how he later went back and saw the same suitcase surface again, and how strange things had started happening ever since. The detectives listened carefully, taking notes. When David finished, one of them said, "We'll send a team to the lake right away. If what you're saying is true, we'll find out." Clara sat silently the whole time, her eyes fixed on the floor. Her hands kept shaking. When they finally left the room, David turned to her. "It's going to be okay," he said softly. "It's over now." But deep down, he wasn't sure. Hours later, as they waited in the lobby, the detectives returned. One of them looked uneasy. "We checked the lake," he said slowly. "We found the suitcase exactly where you said." "But..." David leaned forward. "But what?" The detective met his eyes. "It was empty." David stared at him in disbelief. "Empty? That's impossible. There should have been." The detective raised his hand. "We didn't find a body, sir. Only a torn piece of cloth inside. Looks like part of a shirt." Clara went pale. No, that can't be," she whispered. David felt a chill crawl down his spine. "You mean, someone opened it?" The detective nodded slowly. "Looks that way. And there were footprints near the waterline. Fresh ones." Clara covered her mouth with both hands, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He's out there," she whispered. "He got out." The detective frowned. "Ma'am, I don't know what's going on here, but we'll need both of you to stay in town until we finish our investigation." David nodded silently, too shocked to speak. That night, they were placed in a small guest house near the police station for safety. The officers said they'd keep watch, but David couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that figure standing in the road, staring. Around midnight, Clara finally drifted off to sleep. David sat by the window, staring out into the darkness. The street outside was quiet. The air felt heavy and still. Then, from somewhere far away, he heard it, a faint tapping sound. Soft at first, then louder. Like someone knocking on glass. He turned his head toward the window. And froze. On the other side of the glass, a wet handprint slid slowly down the pane. David's heart stopped for a second. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The wet handprint glistened faintly on the glass, sliding down slowly as if whoever made it had just stepped away. For a long moment, he just sat there frozen, staring at it. The faint moonlight shining through the curtain made the mark look darker, like thick mud. His chest tightened as he stood up carefully, trying not to make any noise. He turned around to check on Clara. She was still asleep, her breathing soft but uneven. Sweat had gathered on her forehead. David hesitated, then walked slowly toward the window. The tapping had stopped, but the air felt heavy, almost suffocating. When he reached the glass, he looked outside carefully. The street was empty. Not a single car, not a single person. Only the quiet hum of the streetlight and the rustling of tree branches in the cold wind. He opened the curtain slightly and looked down at the ground. There were wet footprints just below the window. Bare feet. He stepped back quickly, his heart racing. The footprints led away from the window toward the edge of the street, disappearing into the shadows. He felt his stomach twist. Whoever it was had been standing right outside their room, watching. He locked the window, double-checked the latch, and quietly pulled the curtain back into place. Then he went to the small table near the bed and picked up his phone. There was no signal. He walked around the room, holding it up, but still nothing. Perfect, he muttered under his breath. Suddenly, Clara stirred. David, she whispered sleepily. He turned quickly. It's okay, it's nothing. Go back to sleep. But she sat up, rubbing her eyes. Why are you awake? Did something happen? He hesitated for a moment, then said softly, No. I just couldn't sleep. Go back to bed. Clara looked at him for a long second, her tired eyes scanning his face. You're lying, she said quietly. David sighed, sitting down beside her. There was a sound. Someone was outside the window. Her eyes widened instantly. What? He nodded. There's a handprint on the glass. And footprints below it. She clutched the blanket tightly. He found us, she whispered. He's not going to stop, David. I told you. He wants me to suffer the way he did. Stop, David said firmly. You don't know that. It could be anyone. The police said they'd keep watch. Maybe one of them was checking the windows. But he didn't believe his own words. He had seen those footprints. Bare. Wet. Human. Clara shook her head, her voice trembling. It's him. I can feel it. David ran a hand through his hair and stood up. We're leaving in the morning, he said quietly. I don't care what the police say. We're not staying here another night. The rest of the night passed slowly. Every sound made them jump, the creak of the floorboards, the sigh of the wind. By morning, neither of them had truly slept. The sun rose weakly through the fog, and David felt his exhaustion in every muscle. He checked the window again. The handprint had dried into a faint brown mark, but the footprints below had already been washed away by dew. He and Clara packed quickly. When they went downstairs to return the keys, the old man at the reception gave them a polite smile. Did you sleep well? He asked. David forced a small nod. Fine, thank you. But as they turned to leave, the old man frowned slightly. "Strange thing," he said, pointing toward the window. "You had visitors last night, didn't you?" David froze. "What do you mean?" The old man scratched his head. "I was closing the front gate around midnight. I saw someone standing near your room. Tall fellow. Looked soaking wet. I called out, but he didn't reply. When I went closer, he was gone." Clara's hand tightened around David's arm. David's throat went dry. "Did you see his face?" The man shook his head. "No, sir. Just his shadow in the light. But he moved strange, like his legs were stiff. Didn't seem right." They didn't say anything else. They just thanked him and hurried outside. Once in the car, Clara whispered, "You see? I wasn't imagining it." David didn't respond. He just started the engine and drove toward the main road. He didn't know where to go, only that they had to get far away from that place. After an hour of silent driving, they stopped at a small cafe by the roadside. David ordered coffee while Clara sat quietly, staring out the window. The morning light made her look pale and fragile. When he returned with 2 cups, she finally spoke. "Do you think I'm crazy?" she asked softly. David shook his head. "No. I think you've been through something horrible. And it's not over yet." She looked at him with tired eyes. "He won't let me go, David. I can feel him. It's like he's everywhere." David sighed. "We'll figure it out. Maybe we can talk to Mark. He needs to know what's happening." She hesitated. "No. He'll hate me. I can't face him. Not after what I did to his brother. Clara, he deserves to know the truth. If there's even a chance that Eric is alive, Mark needs to be warned." Before Clara could reply, David's phone vibrated. He looked down and saw an unknown number. "Hello?" he answered cautiously. There was silence on the other end. Then, a faint breathing sound. Wet, heavy breathing. "Hello?" David said again, his voice firm. A low whisper came through the line. "You shouldn't have gone to the police." David's heart skipped. "Who is this?" The line went dead. Clara saw his expression and asked, "What happened?" He didn't answer right away. "It was him," he said finally. "He said we shouldn't have gone to the police." Clara's hands began to shake. "He's watching us." David stood up quickly. "We're leaving. Now." They rushed out of the cafe, got into the car, and drove off again. This time, David didn't care where they went. He just drove. Through the forest, past empty roads, deeper and deeper into the countryside. After a while, Clara said quietly, "Where are we going?" He sighed. "There's an old cabin near the river. My uncle used to own it. No one goes there anymore. We can stay there for a while, figure out what to do next." Clara nodded weakly. "Okay." By the time they reached the cabin, it was late afternoon. The small wooden house stood at the edge of the forest, surrounded by tall trees. It looked lonely and forgotten, the windows dusty, the roof covered in moss. David unlocked the door, and the hinges creaked loudly. Inside, the air smelled old and damp, but it was dry and safe. There was an old fireplace, a couch, and a few chairs covered in white sheets. Clara looked around nervously. "Are you sure no one comes here?" David nodded. "Positive. We'll be safe here." They spent the evening cleaning up a bit and lighting a small fire. The warmth made the room feel almost peaceful. For the first time in days, Clara seemed a little calmer. She sat near the fireplace, staring at the flames. "It's strange," she said softly. "Fire used to scare me. Now it feels like the only thing that keeps me safe. David gave a small smile. We'll be okay, Clara. I promise. But deep down, he wasn't sure. As night fell, the forest outside grew darker. The sound of crickets filled the air. David sat by the window, watching the trees sway in the wind. The moon was half hidden behind clouds, casting dim light across the clearing. Then, somewhere far off, he heard a splash. He frowned, listening carefully. Another splash followed, closer this time. It sounded like someone walking through water. But there was no lake nearby. Only the river, a few hundred meters away. He stood up and went outside quietly, his flashlight in hand. The air was cold, the smell of wet earth strong. He moved slowly toward the sound. Hello, he called out softly. Who's there? No answer. Just the steady sound of water moving. He reached the edge of the riverbank and shone his light across the water. Something glimmered in the beam, a piece of fabric caught on a branch. Dark and soaked. He stepped closer. The fabric looked familiar. It was the same shirt Eric used to wear. The one from the photo Clara had shown him months ago. David's stomach turned. He reached down to pick it up, but as he did, something else floated by, a torn photo, half destroyed by water. He pulled it out. It was a picture of Clara and Eric, smiling on their wedding day. The bottom corner was ripped, and muddy fingerprints covered it. David froze. The prints were fresh. He turned quickly, shining his light around, but the forest behind him was empty. His breath came out fast and shaky. He ran back toward the cabin, his boots crunching on the wet leaves. When he reached the door, he pushed it open and shouted, "Clara! We need to go." But the room was dark. The fire had died. "Clara," he called again, louder this time. There was no answer. He grabbed his flashlight and looked around. Her bag was gone. Her jacket too. He noticed the back door slightly open, moving with the wind. He rushed toward it, stepping outside again. The air felt colder, heavier. Then he saw it, bare footprints in the mud, leading from the cabin to the woods. "Clara," he shouted, his voice echoing through the trees. No reply. He followed the prints deeper into the forest. The wind howled through the branches. The footprints led to a small clearing and stopped. David looked around, confused. "Clara?" Then, from behind him, came a voice. A man's voice. Deep, slow, and familiar. "She came back to me." David turned instantly, his flashlight trembling in his hand. Standing a few feet away was a tall figure, dripping with water. His face was pale, his eyes dark and sunken, but unmistakable. It was Eric. David froze. His flashlight shook in his hand as the beam fell on the man standing before him. It was Eric. Or at least, it looked like him. The same sharp jawline, the same deep eyes, but something was wrong. His skin was too pale, too gray. Water dripped from his hair and clothes, pooling at his feet. His lips were bluish, his eyes glassy like he had been underwater for hours. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The forest was silent except for the faint whisper of wind and the slow dripping of water from Eric's sleeve. Then, slowly, Eric smiled. It wasn't warm, it was cold and bitter. "You shouldn't have taken her away," he said softly. His voice was low, wet, like it came from deep inside his chest. David stepped back, his throat dry. "Eric, how is this possible? You're supposed to be dead?" Eric finished, tilting his head slightly. "Yes. That's what everyone thought. Especially Clara." David's mind spun. "We saw the police report. They found your blood, your wallet, your car. Eric laughed quietly, though the sound sent chills through David's spine. Blood can be faked. Accidents can be arranged. You see, David, I needed to disappear. David frowned, trying to steady his breathing. Disappear? Why? What are you talking about? Eric's smile faded. He took a slow step closer, his shoes squelching in the mud. Because she betrayed me, he whispered. Your precious Clara. My wife. The woman who said she loved me. His eyes darkened, and his voice turned sharp. She killed our baby, David. She took everything from me. David shook his head. No. No, she told me it was an accident. She lost the baby. She lied. Eric shouted suddenly, his voice echoing through the forest. She wanted freedom. She said she couldn't live with me anymore. So she drove us into that lake. She wanted both of us gone. But she survived. She left me to drown. David's heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his ears. That can't be true, he whispered. Clara would never. Eric stepped closer again. His face was only a few feet away now, pale and furious. You think you know her? He said quietly. You think she told you the truth? Did she tell you about the letter she left me? Did she tell you about the suitcase she dumped? David's eyes widened. The suitcase. Eric smiled again, a slow, cruel smile. Yes. The one she threw into the lake. Do you know what was inside it? David's mouth went dry. What? Eric leaned closer, his breath cold as winter. My baby's things. The toys, the clothes, the blanket, everything that reminded her of what she did. She wanted to bury her guilt. David felt his knees weaken. Clara, she said the suitcase was full of old memories. She said she wanted to forget. Eric's eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. She wanted to forget me. But I didn't let her. Before David could move, a voice came from behind him, trembling, broken. Stop it, Eric. He turned. Clara stood a few feet away, her face pale, her eyes wide with tears. She was barefoot, mud covering her feet. She had followed them. Eric turned his head slowly toward her. For a second, his expression softened, but only for a second. You came back, he said quietly. I knew you would. Clara took a step forward, her voice shaking. Eric, you need to let go. Please. What happened that night, it wasn't what you think. The car went out of control. I tried to save you. Eric's face twisted. Liar, he shouted. You pushed me away. You left me to die. Clara shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. No. I tried to open your seatbelt. The door was stuck. I screamed for help, but you sank too fast. I didn't mean for it to happen. David stood between them, holding out a hand. Stop. Both of you. Eric, if you're alive, we can go to the police. You can tell them everything. Eric laughed darkly. The police? You think they'd believe me? To them, I'm a ghost. I've already been buried once, David. He took another step forward, his clothes dripping, his eyes locked on Clara. You don't get to start over. Not with him. Not after what you did. Clara backed away, trembling. Please, Eric, you have to believe me. David's flashlight flickered. The wind grew stronger, rustling through the trees. A low rumble of thunder rolled across the sky. The air felt electric, heavy with tension. Eric took one more step. You buried me, Clara, he said softly. Now it's your turn to see what it feels like. Suddenly, Clara turned and ran. Clara! David shouted, chasing after her. She ran through the woods, branches slapping against her face, tears mixing with rain. The ground was slippery, and she stumbled, catching herself on a tree trunk. Behind her, Eric's footsteps splashed through the mud, closer and closer. David pushed forward, his flashlight bouncing wildly. "Clara, stop! Wait!" But she didn't. She kept running until she reached the edge of the river, the same river where David had found the fabric and the photo. The current was strong now, the water rising from the storm. Clara turned around, breathing hard, her hair clinging to her face. Eric stopped a few meters away, the rain pouring down his face. "You can't run from what you did," he said softly. "Not anymore." Clara shook her head. "I never meant to hurt you. I loved you, Eric. I still do." Eric's face twisted with pain. "Then why did you let me die?" "I didn't," she screamed. "I tried to save you. You don't remember because you were unconscious." The thunder cracked above them, echoing through the trees. David reached them, panting. "Please, listen to her," he shouted. "Eric, she's telling the truth." But Eric didn't look at him. His eyes were locked on Clara. He took one slow step forward, and she stepped back. Her heel hit the edge of the riverbank, and the ground crumbled beneath her. "Clara!" David shouted. She slipped and fell backward into the rushing water. David jumped after her without thinking. The cold hit him like a wall, stealing his breath. The current pulled him down, spinning him through the dark water. He surfaced for a moment, gasping, searching, and saw Clara's hand reaching out just ahead. He swam toward her, fighting the current. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw Eric standing on the riverbank, watching silently. The water rose around his feet, but he didn't move. His face was calm, almost peaceful. "Eric!" David shouted, choking on water. "Help us!" But Eric only whispered something, words lost in the roar of the river. David reached Clara and grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the shore. The water fought them both, but he pushed with all his strength. Finally, they reached the edge, gasping for air. He dragged her up onto the muddy bank, coughing hard. When he looked back across the water, Eric was gone. Clara lay beside him, shaking. Her lips were pale, her eyes wide. "He's gone," she whispered. "Just like before." David held her hand tightly. "It's over," he said, though his voice trembled. "He can't hurt you now." But Clara shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "You don't understand." David frowned. "What do you mean?" She turned to look at him, her eyes full of sorrow. "Eric wasn't alive, David. He died that night in the lake. What you saw, what we both saw, wasn't him." David stared at her, confused. "Then what was it?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "It was the lake. It took him, and now it wants me too." Lightning flashed across the sky, and thunder rolled again, but David barely heard it. He looked toward the river. For a moment, in the flicker of light, he saw something standing in the water. A shape. Tall. Motionless. Watching them. And then it was gone. The rain kept falling long after the thunder faded. The forest was quiet again, except for the steady patter of drops hitting the river. David sat beside Clara, both of them soaked, shivering, and silent. The air was heavy with fear and confusion. What she had just said echoed in his mind again and again. It was the lake. It took him. He looked at her, his face pale in the dim light. "Clara, what do you mean?" "The lake, it took him?" "What are you saying?" Clara hugged her knees tightly, staring at the water. "You don't understand, David. The lake isn't just water. It's a curse. That place, it's alive. David frowned. That doesn't make sense. You're just in shock. We almost drowned. She turned to him sharply. No! You didn't see what I saw that night. Her voice cracked as she spoke. When the car went into the water, I tried to open the door. I screamed for Eric, but he wasn't moving. Then I saw something in the reflection. A shadow, pulling him down. I felt it, like cold hands dragging him away. I tried to hold on, but it was too strong. And when I got out, the water went still. It was like the lake swallowed him. David's heart thudded in his chest. You think something in the lake killed him? She nodded slowly, her eyes glassy with tears. And now it's following me. Ever since that night, I've seen him. In the mirrors, in the windows, in my dreams. I thought it was my guilt. But it wasn't. It was him. Or whatever took him. It wants me too. David shook his head, trying to stay rational, but deep down he couldn't explain what he'd seen: Eric's pale face, his dripping clothes, his voice. That couldn't be a living man. And when he disappeared into the river like mist, no human could do that. He looked at the river again. The surface rippled gently, as if something was moving underneath. His stomach turned. Clara, he said softly, we need to leave this place. Now. But Clara didn't move. She was still staring at the water, her face blank. You can't just leave, she whispered. Once the lake chooses you, it doesn't stop. It takes what it wants. Suddenly, the air around them changed. The wind stopped. The rain slowed to a drizzle. The forest grew unnaturally silent. Then, the river began to bubble. David stood up quickly. Clara, get back, he shouted. The water churned, swirling like something huge was moving beneath it. The mud along the edge started to tremble. Clara's eyes widened in terror. She took a step back, but the ground was slick and soft. Her foot slipped, and she fell onto her knees. David reached for her. Clara! Take my hand! She grabbed it, her fingers cold and trembling. He pulled hard, but then something wrapped around her ankle, something dark and wet, like a hand made of water. Clara screamed, clutching his arm. David! Don't let go! He pulled with all his strength. I won't! Hold on! The shadowy hand tightened its grip, dragging her inch by inch toward the river. The water began to rise around them, swirling faster and faster. David could feel it pulling at his legs too. He gritted his teeth and pulled harder, his muscles burning. Clara, he shouted again. Fight it! But she was crying now, shaking her head. It won't let me go. I can feel him. He's here. And then David saw it, a face beneath the surface, faint but clear. Eric's face. His eyes open, his mouth moving as if whispering her name. Clara. The sound was faint but real. No! David yelled. You're dead. Stay away from her. He pulled again, shouting her name, but the water surged upward, knocking him off his feet. He fell back, his flashlight slipping from his hand. The beam spun wildly before landing in the mud, pointing toward the river. Clara's grip slipped. For one last second, their eyes met, hers full of fear and regret. Tell Mark I'm sorry, she whispered. Tell him. I loved him like my own son. Clara! No! David screamed. Her hand slipped from his. The water swallowed her in an instant. He lunged forward, diving after her, but the river was too strong. It spun him around, dragging him under. He fought to reach her, kicking and pushing, his lungs burning. But there was nothing, just darkness and cold. When he finally broke the surface, gasping, she was gone. David crawled to the bank, coughing, his whole body shaking. "Clara," he shouted again and again, but his voice was lost in the sound of rushing water. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the river went calm. The rain stopped completely. The forest was still. The only sound was his ragged breathing. He sat there for a long time, staring at the water, unable to move. The moon broke through the clouds, casting a silver light across the surface. For a moment, it looked peaceful again, like nothing had ever happened. Then, something floated up from the dark, a small suitcase. David's eyes widened. The same suitcase. The one Clara had thrown into the lake. It drifted slowly toward the bank, bumping softly against the mud. His hands trembled as he reached for it. The lock was rusted, but weak. He pried it open with a rock. Inside, there were old baby clothes, a small teddy bear, and a folded photograph. He lifted the photo carefully. It was of Eric and Clara, smiling together, holding a baby blanket between them. But the photo had changed. Eric's face was scratched out. The edges were damp, and written in faded ink at the bottom were 3 words, "She took him." David's heart sank. He closed the suitcase and looked at the river again. For a moment, he thought he saw movement under the surface, a faint, pale shape watching him, then it disappeared. The next morning, the police found David sitting by the riverbank, still holding the suitcase. His clothes were soaked, his eyes blank. He didn't speak much after that. When they asked him what happened, he only said one thing. She went back to him. Weeks later, the police drained part of the river to search for Clara's body. They found no trace of her, only an old car buried in the mud, with Eric's wallet still inside. The windows were shattered, and on the inside of the driver's door, there was a single handprint, smaller, faintly visible under the grime. They closed the case as an accident. But David knew the truth. He knew the lake didn't like to give things back. Every night, he still dreamed of that sound, the faint splash, the whisper of a voice calling from the water. Sometimes, when the wind blew just right, he could almost hear her say his name. And every time he passed a lake or a river, he couldn't help but look into the water, expecting to see her face, or his. Because some things, once buried, never really stay dead. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Every story hides a truth, sometimes the scariest ones are the ones we can't see.